today has been dominated by the testimony of President Cyril Ramaphosa at the state capture inquiry representing the ANC. He's back there at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Professor Hanyane is a professor of politics at the University of Northwest. Professor, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. There was, and this came within his opening statement, an acknowledgement from the President that the ANC made mistakes. How important is that acknowledgement testifying under oath today?
Stephen, good evening to your viewers. Look, I think it's consistent with that open letter that he once penned to his own party members, but also appealing to all South Africans that indeed the ANC has made mistakes, and he acknowledges these mistakes. And if one listens to people like Dr. Kulumbata, one of the ANC veterans, who went a step further to say perhaps it's more than that. It should be the issue of whether the ANC was ready to govern and had put processes in place and, of course, had a core of individuals politically and administratively to lead this country forward in a way that the continent would in a sense, look upon South Africa as a source of envy, and not necessarily in the continent alone, but globally as well. So it's an admission that one would appreciate, that rightly so, it's consistent with his own position ever since he took office of the presidency itself.
Do you think that the acknowledgement goes far enough? Do you think voters maybe wanted more? And I'll be the first to say that I don't think really a judicial forum, and this is a judicial forum, would be the right place for an apology, but some people might have been expecting that.
Well, it will come in different forms. I've listened to him in colloquiums, in lectures, in gala dinners. There is that sense of admission that he would want to portray outright, regardless of the audience. That's a plus factor. What bothers me is that admission alone does not necessarily give us that sense of hope that this government and, of course, the leadership in his party will actually one day steer this ship called South Africa towards calmer waters, given the level of challenges that we experience, the issue of graft, the issue of patronage, the issue of maladministration, mismanagement of state resources. You can name that foray of corrupt activities. I still want to see that sense of agency coming from him. Admission alone would not suffice.
The President also, obviously cadre deployment. If you had to give today a theme at the Zondo Commission, it was probably cadre deployment. The President defending the policy, sort of suggesting that other governing parties would do the same. Is that true? And it gets to a very complicated conversation around how a political party actually governs. In the United States, for example, when the power changes hands at the presidency level, some of the officials change, some of them don't. The same happens in the United Kingdom and other democracies. Where do you stand on this?
Well, look, when it comes to the issue of deployment, I think it's one of those contradictions that he gave us today. I wouldn't agree with him, but at the same time, I must take note that there is also a further contradiction between his interpretation as well as that of Mr. Mandasha not so long ago. What I find very difficult is that despite the noble idea of having deployment, the question is, was it done in a scientific way to guarantee the very same things that he spoke about, i.e., putting professionals in key strategic positions and those that qualify, not necessarily based on some kind of clandestine arrangements. So you have pockets of such incidences. And the question happens then that if the vetting of these individuals prior to them being positioned in these strategic key positions in the public service. Take the example of SABC, for instance. How many scandals did we have surrounding this issue? So somewhere I felt he missed the point. There was lack of science when this deployment mechanism was used. Rightly so, it's an international practice, but from a South African perspective, I think there was a misuse of some of these appointments.
So, I mean, in a way, the president sort of stating and restating, really, because he said this before, that the ANC will reform itself, it won't use patronage. Is the party capable of doing that? I mean, we've seen, I think, some change, perhaps, but, you know, people will look at the evidence, and the evidence will be contested, but the start of any reform process is always contested.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Stephen. And I also think that it will mean that the ANC, the leadership thereof must bite the bullet. I don't see that forthcoming. To what degree are these leaders able to accept wrongdoing besides Ramaphosa? We'll have to wait and see come this Friday, for instance, whether the resolution to step aside will materialize. I see a lot of confusion coming from that front. I also don't see the ANC taking full responsibility, that the idealism of introspection, of unity, for instance, it's taken to heart, not through speeches, not through rhetoric, but real actions that, as I said earlier, beckon agency. I'm not reading that at the current moment.
I mean, a completely related point is the breaking news on our screen. Supra Mahumapelo, former leader of the ANC in Northwest, former premier of Northwest, the interim provincial committee there says that they're suspending Supra Mahumapelo for 5 years, along with another official from the ANC Women's League, because of comments he made for setting up parallel structures. He's going to be mentored by the former president, Thabo Mbeki. I think that'll be interesting to watch. But, I mean, again, we're back to this question, Professor Hanyane. I mean, does an interim provincial committee in the Northwest really have much power over Supra Mahumapelo when he still represents the ANC as a member of parliament?
I think they have power. So long as the Tule House has sanctioned the establishment of the same structure, surely they do have power. And it comes as no surprise that they even go a step further to provide some measure of sanction. And interestingly enough, against a former provincial leader. This perhaps would send a strong message to all in sundry that they mean business. At the heart of it all is to maintain and consolidate the ANC's power and make sure that whatever is left of the ANC image, either nationally or within the province itself, remains intact or is somewhat protected, which, by the way, would be a challenge to carry. So I see the Supra case as nothing short of saying, here's an exemplary initiative that this PIC can take. Nobody is off the hook, and indeed, this may very well be some measure of demonstrating seriousness, yet to be questioned, but being done nonetheless.
Professor Barry Hanyane, do appreciate the time. Thanks very much indeed for your